Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone who's joining us from around the world. My name is Pete Camisa from Black Diamond Advisory, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar featuring the Accordion Rolling Forecast. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. A few housekeeping items. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature along the bottom. As your host, I'll be monitoring the Q&A while Gary Serrao takes us through the presentation. We'll also have a few polls throughout, so they'll pop right up on your screen, and please answer those and have some fun with them. And we're going to leave time for interaction, a little bit of Q&A at the end, but don't hesitate, don't hold back, get those questions and comments in the Q&A throughout. See a few folks still filtering in. I'm just going to wait one more minute, and then we're going to get started. All right. Once again, thanks everybody for joining. Why don't I tell you a little bit about Black Diamond Advisory before we get into the demonstration. This is largely going to be a demonstration presentation. We're not going to spend the first 20 minutes on slides. But just very quickly, I think it's important for those of you who don't know us, or perhaps know us from a number of years ago. Black Diamond is a really exciting place. We've grown a ton over the past few years. We are the largest dedicated global partner, dedicated fully to OneStream, and we've got over 200 OneStream projects completed successfully, which kind of puts us into the Diamond partner range by a multiple of 4. One of the things that we focus on is besides our dedication to OneStream, our global presence is also our innovation. Black Diamond and our innovation, and this is what you're about to see today, are really synonymous in my mind. When OneStream presented us with a platform to develop on and to provide the OneStream community with solutions to accelerate their time to value, we were all in. And the very first solution, and a fan favorite, a customer favorite of ours, is the Accordion Rolling Forecast. So now I'll tell you a little bit, 2 minutes about myself, our presenters. I'm Pete Camisa. I'm a senior director in our sales support organization. I come from a long background of implementation in CPM solutions over 16 years. And now I really enjoy focusing my time and career on helping our prospective customers of OneStream and Black Diamond Advisory realize what they can do with this platform. I'm joined today by your presenter, Gary Serrao. Go ahead and give yourself an intro, Gary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Serrao. I'm a director on the sales support team here at Black Diamond Advisory. Prior to joining the sales support team here at BDA, I spent over a decade implementing CPM solutions across multiple different industries. My personal area of expertise is in FP&A, specifically financial statement planning, compensation, capital planning. So appreciate everyone joining today, and really looking forward to an informative and interactive session here. In terms of today's agenda, only a few items here. We're going to spend just a couple minutes talking through an intro to the Accordion Rolling Forecast. And then we're going to jump right into a live demo, take you through what that accordion looks like, how the functionality works, and how we can leverage it for your business. We're definitely going to leave time at the end there for Q&A, but to Pete's point earlier, if you have questions throughout, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and we'll try to get those answered as we move through where appropriate.
Thanks, Gary. And it looks like our first poll question has launched. And we've got some answers filtering in. And really, this was to get an understanding of where everyone is today, right? We're all on this continuous journey of improvement, modernization, and innovation in our FP&A processes. And sometimes the process and the technology are in alignment. Sometimes one is lagging or accelerating past the other. So really, 3 major buckets is that we're still maybe in an Excel world, and just getting a tool would be great, and we'd love to just be in a tool. Second bucket, where it looks like the majority of our attendees are, we're in the system, but we're still doing a lot of manual work. We might have some drivers in place. And then ultimately, and unsurprisingly, the minority of our respondents are very mature in their process and technology. They're ready for the future. They're ready for predictive analytics, applied AI, sensible machine learning, and all those promises the future has to offer.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So with that, we're going to jump right in here. And we're going to talk a little bit about, first of all, what is Accordion, right? So a couple times a year, at least once for annual plan, and then maybe quarterly, maybe it is monthly. The FP&A organizations are directed to deliver what we consider to be key indicators of a company's financial strength. And that comes in the form of a current year forecast and an annual operating plan. As I mentioned, the two of those aren't always part of the process, but we know that organizations are always striving to get to a point where they can put together a forecast in addition to that annual operating plan to help with the financial outlook of the business on a more regular basis. Now, traditionally, these two concepts have been disconnected. The reason for that is timing, right? Level of effort, planning, granularity. So the two of those things, the forecast and the plan, don't always happen at the same level of detail. The timing in which they occur and the level of effort it takes to get them done don't always allow for them to happen together or in a connected fashion. So the accordion style rolling forecast eliminates the need for those two processes to live separately. It allows for them to be planned together, and we're able to leverage that common methodology. And that's something that we're going to look at in great detail during today's demo. So one of the key factors supporting an accordion style rolling forecast is the ability to leverage driver-based planning. So by making the investment to determine and build out those driver-based models, it's going to allow for the pre-calculation of a forecast baseline. During that monthly close process, as prior month actuals are consolidated and the forecast period is rolled over, those planning driver calculations are automatically refreshed. So now planners open up a forecast cycle with 80% or more of their forecast already completed. And now you're free to plan more by exception, and you can really focus on the few areas that require adjustment or manual intervention based on information that your financial analysts are getting on a regular basis. So this driver-based process is what makes pushing out the forecast into year 2 and beyond a more systematic effort, and it eliminates that need for a separate budget scenario that you're building from the ground up. So if we take a quick look at the evolution of the forecast, or the different types of forecasts that we're all probably familiar with, we're going to start by taking a look at a simple forecast. So a simple forecast is when you're planning for the current fiscal year only with no insight into the next year. So if you look at the graphic to the right there for simple forecast, in a 3+9 forecast situation, we have January through March of actual data, and then we have April through December of our forecast data. But we have no information that goes into that second year beyond that December year end, okay? With a standard rolling forecast, this is going to improve upon the simple approach in that the planners are now thinking in terms of that full year outlook. So you're planning for that full 12 months of seasonality, and it can be in the form of a 12, 18, 24-month range. However, all of those methods are still going to leave those orphaned months in the last year. So if we look at our rolling forecast, our 12-month rolling forecast graphic here, in the 3+9 situation, again, we have January through March of actuals, we have our April through December forecast, and then we're going 3 additional months into March of year 2 so that we're getting that full 12-month outlook. But then for the remainder of year 2, we have nothing from April to December. So now that would require additional planning effort to fill in those months without gaining much additional insight. So it's additional effort without much payoff in the end when you're trying to focus on those months that have not been filled in. So the accordion style rolling forecast will always ensure that that year 2 of your forecast is fully filled out. So that gives you a complete year 2 population, that gives you complete year over year, quarter over quarter, current year budget versus next year budget type of analysis. And as you can see in the graphic to the right, it also eliminates the orphaned months that exist in a 12, 18, or 24-month rolling forecast method. Now, to further extend, the capabilities that you gain with leveraging an accordion rolling forecast, as the first year comes to an end, the final forecast cycle of the year is used to populate the budget scenario for the next year. So as you can see there, because we have that full year two, we can take that data and we can use it to precede our budget scenario. So that allows for that budget snapshot at the beginning of the second year. And then throughout year two, that version can be compared to what was in the accordion forecast. So you can continue to make adjustments to your budget, and then you can you can compare that to what was in your accordion forecast for year two and continue to make tweaks as the year goes on. And then beyond just the annual budget, the accordion forecast can be used to populate additional scenarios, such as an adjusted budget, a what if, or even a less granular long-range plan. So as you can see here, we're even going out to a year 3, 4, and 5 LRP. And we're going to see how that works in just a minute here when we get into the live demo. But before that, I think we have one more poll question.
Yes, we sure do, Gary. I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now. So through our global travels with our customers and prospective customers, we've actually learned that the accordion is not widely known around the world. Although it's been around for quite a number of years. And we either have we have attendees who are just incredibly fast at using Google, or the accordion is way more popular with this audience than we may have anticipated. The correct answer is 1822. It's been around over 200 years.
Fantastic. All right. So we are going to move into the live demo. And before I jump into a specific form to talk about the accordion, I want to stop here on what we refer to as the stream map for a second here, because this does come as part of the accordion rolling forecast when you work with Black Diamond Advisory. And what I like to refer to this as is something that puts structure around the unstructured world of FP&A. So unlike your monthly close process, where you have a set of tasks that occur in a very linear fashion, you have users that are going in on a regular basis and completing those tasks. When it comes to budget or forecast, you may have users that are only going into the system a couple times a year. You may have a more iterative process, right, where it's not so linear, so you need to jump between tasks. And then you may have many different processes. As you can see here, you might have income statement planning, capital, compensation. And what the stream map does is it organizes those workflows for the users to make it very simple for them to manage the tasks that go along with completing a particular piece of your forecast or your plan. Now, this is driven off of security. So this is more of a power user type view that you're seeing here. So not only are you seeing end user type tasks, you're also seeing some of the setup or the more administrative type tasks. And one of the ones that we're going to focus on a little bit later is something that we refer to as scenario manager, which is going to give you the capability to manage some of that what if analysis and also archiving of the data, which we'll take a look at later. And one other thing to call out here is, even though today we're talking about the accordion rolling forecast and we're focusing really on that income statement type of planning, the stream map also does continue to grow with your use of one stream overall. So as you start to bring other processes on board in addition to this, like capital planning or compensation planning, it's very easy to add those into the stream map so that they become available to the users. So with that, I'm going to jump into an operating expenses form for purposes of today's demo. We're going to spend a lot of our time talking about the accordion and some of that core functionality. So what you're seeing here, and before we dive into a specific use case here, I just want to spend a little bit of time getting oriented with how this form is laid out and how some of this is functioning. So at the top here, we have drop-down menus, the first one being the specific task that we're working on. As I mentioned, this is an operating expenses form. I'm looking at a specific entity and a specific department combination for purposes of planning today. This is fully configurable to meet the needs of your business. So if you plan by entity and cost center, or if you want to plan revenue and COGS by a combination of entity, cost center, and product, we can make sure that this is fully configured to meet the needs of your business and aligns to the metadata of your specific application. But again, for purposes of today's session, I'm planning as a combination of an entity and a specific department here. Now, if we look across the columns here, and this is where we start to understand why we call this the accordion. In this particular instance, I'm looking at an 8+4 forecast. So I have 8 months of actual data. I have 4 months of forecast data for the remainder of 2023. That rolls now immediately into my next year's budget, right, for 2024. And then beyond that, I'm going even further out into a year 3, 4, 5 of my long range plan. As I move through my actual months and they close and they become actualized here, these columns will shift, right? So this will become an actual column next month, and then I will only have 3 months of forecast, and then I can recalculate budget, I can recalculate LRP based on what's happening. I also have the ability to expand and collapse my view here. So as I move through the forecast, if I determine that I no longer want to see my forecast months because I want to focus on budget, I have the ability to easily turn on and off the columns that I'm seeing. So in this case, I want to hide my forecast and I want to focus on my budget. I can do that. So again, one of the many reasons why we refer to this as the accordion is that constant expanding and collapsing of the columns as you not only move through the year from a forecast and a budget perspective, but also from an end user view settings capability, right? That expansion and that collapsing of the columns that you can determine on your own. So in this particular case, I've changed my view settings, and I'm going to bring my forecast back up here so that we can look at it again. One thing I do want to point out within the view options is this is part of the core functionality of Accordion, and this is end user specific. So as an end user, I have the ability to determine what I'm seeing on the screen. Do I want to see prior months? Do I want to see forecast? And if I am seeing forecast, do I want it to be year total and then the periods, or do I want it to be the periods and year total? I have the flexibility as the end user to choose those specific view options, which lessens the burden when it comes to development of saying we need to create 5 different flavors of this one form, right? Because users may want to see it a few different ways. I have the capability to change my view specifically, and that's only for me, that specific end user. So again, another piece of functionality that is extremely valuable within the accordion. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be planning for an 8+4 in 2023. And what you're seeing here is in green are the months that I cannot edit because they're actual. And then the white cells here are where I have the ability to edit data. And that's either through direct input or it could be through a calculation. Okay. And what I can do here is off to the left is I can choose a specific trend method and a rate to populate that data for me. Now, one thing you might notice here is that these are pre-populated, right? So as I mentioned earlier, part of the value of the driver-based methodology and accordion in general is that because these methods are pre-populated, as soon as I open up my form, as I mentioned earlier, 80 to 90% of my forecast or my budget is already complete for me. So now all I need to do is go into the specific months and line item detail that I know need to change due to information that I've gotten from the business, or some kind of outside source that will determine we need to make a change to something that we've planned. So in this case, for my forecast, I've chosen a specific trailing 9-month average. If I wanted to, I could go in and for that specific account, I could change it to a different trend. So with the accordion, you're getting 25 plus out of the box trends that you can leverage. So if I wanted to choose a trailing 3, 6, 9-month average, I could do a prior year 3, 6, 9-month average, or I could even leverage something like a percent of revenue, or we even have a custom field available where I could say percent of. So maybe for a promotions line, I want that to be percent of sales or net sales or something like that. So you have the ability to specify another driver that your business is using that you want to be leveraged here specifically. So not only are we giving you the out-of-the-box functionality for trends that we know get used on a very regular basis, we want to give you some of that flexibility to say, well, for our business specifically, there are some drivers or other drivers that we would like to leverage in addition to, say, just percent of revenue, and you're getting that capability here. So in this instance, I'm going to choose a trailing 9-month average. In addition to the 9-month average, I can also choose a percentage increase or decrease. So in addition to the trailing 9-month average, I want to increase by 10%. You'll see here that my cell has changed to a yellow color because I haven't yet saved it. And once I save it, we'll see that the values immediately update based on the trend and the percent that I've input here. You'll notice to the right of that, I have a separate trend and in percent increase that I can choose specifically for budget. So oftentimes, and again, this is based on, a lot of our expertise and experience over the years in working with various FP&A departments, is that when I'm working on a budget versus a forecast, I don't always want to use the same methodology, right? For a forecast, I might find that it makes a lot of sense to leverage my prior actual months, but for a budget, maybe I want to leverage prior year data because I want to capture some of that seasonality, right? So oftentimes we want to be able to choose a different trend for budget versus forecast, and we're giving you that capability here. So if you wanted to, you could choose the same trend that you've had for forecast. But in this instance, I would prefer to use a prior year 3-month average, and I want to increase that by 6%. Or if I want to increase that, say, by 8%, I can save that, and we'll see that my budget data will increase also. So again, you're getting that flexibility to say, in a forecast, I want to do one thing, in a budget, I want to do another. But if I want it to be the same throughout, I absolutely have that capability as well. And the data will continue to build upon itself as you move from the forecast into that annual budget, and then ultimately into your LRP.
Hey, Gary,
Yeah.
just a question that popped up. And if you want to just open up one of those method drop downs for us again. The question is, am I limited to the methods that appear in the drop down, or what if we have, as a customer, we have a specific method that isn't represented in the drop down list?
Yeah, so absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, we can fully configure this to meet the needs of your business. So in addition to all of these out-of-the-box trends, if there are specific trends or methods that you're leveraging for your business, we can absolutely add those in here. So you are not limited to what comes here out of the box. We can continue to add on to all of these methods based on what it is that you're using from a forecast and a budget perspective. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
So as one of the questions that begins to arise as we start to show this driver-based approach is, well, I love the fact that this is driver-based and it's calculating a majority of the plan and the forecast for me, but there are times where I know for a fact that I need to make a manual adjustment. And that is something that we've accounted for here, absolutely. And not only can you make that adjustment, but we allow you to make those adjustments in place. So you don't have to go to an adjustment member. So again, I'm going to stick here within advertising and promotions, and I'm specifically looking at my promotions line. I don't have to create, like I do in other EPM or CPM tools, an adjustment line so that I can say that in this case, I don't want to take the calculation, I want to take an adjusted value. I can simply override what's in this cell. So I know for September 2023, I'm going to be running some additional promotions. So I'm going to increase the value that I've forecasted there through a manual input. I'm going to click save. And what's happening here is it's saving that manual override. And I don't know if you can see it here on my screen share, but it's changing the color of the number from a light blue to a black color. So now everyone who comes into this form who has access to the same intersection is now aware that a manual adjustment has been made here. I haven't interrupted the calculation of all of the other accounts, right? So everything after that is still using the selected forecast trend. Everything in my budget year is still using the budget trend that I've selected. But for that one particular period, I am able to make that manual override. So you get that flexibility to leverage the combination of driver-based planning as well as manual input. And now I'm sure if someone hasn't put it in the chat already, I'm sure somebody's already thinking it. Well, that's great, right? But I need to be able to know when users are making manual adjustments to have some type of audit trail, right? Or some type of accountability to know why that change is being made. So you absolutely have that functionality as well. So I'm going to jump back into my view options here for a second, and I'm going to turn on what we refer to as the cell detail pane. And within that cell detail pane, I'm going to get a bunch of additional information on the screen right in front of me. So by clicking on the cell that I've edited, I can see a full cell history. So it's going to show me what is the value that was input, when was that value input, who was the user that made that input, so that any changes that occur to that cell from that point forward are going to be managed in and reflected in this cell history. So you're getting that full audit capability. As the user who made the adjustment, I also have the ability to make annotations or notes. So if I know I'm going to be running a September 23 promo, I'm going to make that a note here, and I'm going to save it so that that note is now attached to that cell. So again, if there's an approval process that this needs to go through where someone's going to be reviewing this forecast, I have that note there for them. If there are other users, right, that are going into this same intersection to plan other lines, they can see that note. Or for myself, right, oftentimes I might be doing something, come back to it days or weeks later, and I have that notation there to remind me what was the reason for that change. So you have that full audit and notation capability. And then if it's a calculated value, you have the calculation and data details, which is going to show you how have I arrived at that calculated value. So what is the calculation logic, and why am I getting that particular value? So all of this that I'm showing you right here is standard one-stream functionality, but what we've done with the Accordion Rolling Forecast is packaged it up and put it right there at the fingertips of the FP&A users to make the overall process much easier and much more straightforward.
Boy, I could think of a lot of administrators who I've worked with over the years who benefit from that cell history. We used to, you get those frantic phone calls from your end users. My number changed, my number moved, who touched my data. And I know when I was doing production support, I'd spend a lot of time combing through logs just to find that. And the fact that it's just right here on the surface, thanks to the Accordion and OneStream's technology, would save a lot of hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely the truth. Okay, so I've made a manual change. One other piece of functionality related to overrides and manual input in general that I want to show you here is there are times where you may make a manual update and then you determine down the line that override is no longer needed, right? I want to revert back to the trend or calculation logic that I was leveraging earlier. Oftentimes in other CPM tools, you do something like this, you make a manual override in place like this, and now that cell will no longer calculate. That is not the case with Accordion. I can simply delete that override value. I can click save at the top of my form here, and it's going to immediately revert back to calculating based on the trend that was selected. So again, you're not only are you harnessing the power of driver-based planning, the ability to make overrides, but you're very easily able to switch between the two, right? So you don't have to go through that extra effort of breaking the calculation, fixing it, and making sure that once you remove that override, the calculation comes back. It's going to happen for you automatically, and you don't have to be concerned about it. So now as we move out to the right here, we talked about forecast. We talked about our ability to budget separately from our forecast, right? So if I wanted to choose a separate trend for my budget, I could. I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we move out to our long range plan here. So as I mentioned earlier, we have year 25, 26, 27, which would be years 3, 4, 5 of our plan at this point. And this is what we're going to call our long range plan. Now, oftentimes, when you choose to do something like an LRP, the level of granularity is going to change because you're not necessarily going to have all of the information that you need to fill in the details, but you want to have a directional idea of what your expenses or your revenue could look like going out that span of time. And also, you may not, have the tolerance to go down to the same level of detail from a period perspective, right? So I don't want to go and build out a 12-month plan for years 3, 4, and 5. I just want to plan an annual number, and I don't want to plan at that GL level detail. I want to take it up a level. So in the example, if we're sticking with advertising and promotions, I don't want to plan promotion, advertising, and business entertainment. I simply want to plan at the total advertising and promotions line. You can do that using the Accordion, but it's leveraging a key component of OneStream, which is called extensible dimensionality. So it makes it very easy for you to specify in your metadata that I do not want to plan at the same level of detail, and I can trigger that or base it off of a scenario or a version. So I could say for my forecast and my budget, advertising and promotion needs to go down to that GL level detail. But when I get to LRP, I only want it to occur at advertising and promotions, and I only want it to happen at the annual level. I don't want to go down to the months. So you're able to easily do that here without having to create additional members as placeholders, right? Because as many of you may know, if you've worked in the EPM, CPM world for quite a while, to accomplish this task of planning at a higher level, you have to create specific accounts to hold that data for, say, budget purposes only. And then it makes the comparison of budget to actuals that much harder because everything is happening at different levels. But through the one-stream extensible dimensionality, this becomes pretty seamless. And then one other aspect to the LRP here that I'm going to show you is that we can also leverage a top-down approach using push-down targets as opposed to that bottom-up build. And I'm going to show that to you right now through our push-down targets form. So you'll notice as we're switching forms here, I was on entity and department specifically, right? But as I move to my push down targets, I'm only going to be looking at an entity. I'm not going to look at departments specifically. So at the total entity for all departments for my advertising and promotions, I can specify a growth percentage for the 3 years of my LRP. So 25, 26, 27. I can specify different growth percentages for each of those years. In this case, let's say 15% for 2025. I'm going to click save, and we'll see that the new 2025 year total number for all departments for the Sydney entity is now the 189,035. And then if we move out to the right here, what I'm doing is I'm calculating a push down basis or a push down percentage based on historical information. So historically, for my advertising and promotions, this is how it was broken up across the different departments. And if you remember, my department 103 that I was looking at on the prior form was my HR and compliance form. I can allocate down to that department, okay, at 26.47%. So it's going to take that 189,035 that I've calculated in total now using a growth percentage, and it's going to push down 26.4% of that down to the HR and compliance department specifically. Okay, so I'm able here to not only leverage the growth percentage in total, but then I can push that data down to the department level to make the reporting and the variance analysis that much easier, because now I have the data at that level of detail to match what I was doing in my forecast or my budget. So this is huge here because this is expanded capability, right? Giving you that additional LRP, but also giving you the flexibility to leverage a push down or a top down approach as opposed to bottom up for time savings. So it's extremely powerful, you know, in our opinion, when it comes to completing an LRP. So if I jump back over to operating expenses here, you know, as I mentioned, because we're back on that 103 department specifically, I would see that 26% of the 189,000 pushed out to department 103, and that is how my LRP is filled out. Now, before I jump off of this form to talk a little bit about what happens at the end of the process, right? How do we go about saving off versions and performing some of that what if analysis? I do want to point out something that's at the top of this form that we haven't really addressed to this point. And that's the fact that for all of this compensation data, so salaries, taxes, bonuses, insurance, workers' comp, other types of benefits, even in the open forecast months, this data is read only. I'm not able to write here. And the reason for that, you'll see over off to the left, we're calling out that this data is coming directly from an underlying submodel for compensation planning. So what you have the ability to do with Accordion is leverage or bring together all of the data that exists in your underlying or submodels as well. So if you start to build out compensation planning, capital planning, as we were talking about earlier from that stream map, we can then connect your Accordion forms to pull that data in directly from those underlying sources so that you can see all of that data in a consolidated fashion. But what we're doing is to preserve the quality of that data. We're not allowing the users to edit it here, because what you would need to do is go into that submodel and make your changes directly in your compensation solution so that they're pushed to your Accordion and reflected here. Now, when I say pushed, you know, this data is all existing in one place, right? Because OneStream is truly a platform, everything that I build from a planning perspective, a closing consolidation perspective, account reconciliations, whatever the case may be, that data is available to me everywhere at all times, right? So there's no need to build any kind of complex integrations or anything like that. This data all exist in the same application. We're simply linking it onto the form so that it makes it easy for the user to see what was my compensation data. And we're even stripping off some of the detail, right? Because normally with a compensation model, you might see position or employee level detail. Here, we're stripping that off and we're giving it to you in total for this entity and department. What was my salary, tax, bonus expense? What were my benefit expenses? But you do have the ability to right click on those cells and say, you know what, I want to navigate down to that compensation detail and I want to see all of the information that makes up that number. So because everything is connected and living in that single application, you absolutely have the ability to navigate to the compensation detail and see all of the specific employee or position detail that makes up that number. And of course, that all will be driven off of security. So if you aren't supposed to have access to that type of information, it will not appear on the form. But for users that do have access to the compensation detail, they would absolutely be able to see it. So again, extremely powerful functionality in that we're able to tie everything together and give you that one consolidated view of your entire plan. So now I've gotten to the point where I've completed my forecast. I've completed my annual budget for next year. I've even completed my years 3, 4, and 5 of my LRP. What generally happens next? And in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to jump back to my stream map and I'm going to go to my scenario manager. And in my scenario manager, this is going to give me the ability to, first of all, roll over the forecast period. So if I've decided, you know what, I'm finished with my 8+4 forecast, which I was in the working scenario, right? I now want to change it to begin to work on my 9+3. Right? So the first period of my forecast is now going to be October. So what I would do is I would simply choose the year, the first period of my forecast, what is the scenario that I'm currently working in, which is the working scenario, and I would click save, and that's going to roll it over. So now when I go back into my OpEx form, I will now see my 9 months of actual data and my 3 months of forecast. So it's that easy for your power users or your administrators to roll over your forecast period so that you can start the next forecast cycle. Now, the other powerful piece of Scenario Manager is for that archiving or copying for simply saving a version or for doing that comparative analysis or variance analysis. So I can leverage the archive and copy scenario functionality to say, I want to copy my working version, right, for my forecast 8+4 for all the cubes that I was working in for 2023, so that now I've taken the working version, I've saved it into something called forecast 8+4. So it's done, right? I'm no longer editing it. I can go back to the working version, continue to make updates, and then I can do a comparison to say, if I were to change these 3 or 4 things, I now want to compare it up against what I saved off prior to see what the variance would look like. So now you're starting to see the ability to do that what if analysis, that comparative analysis, and the power of some of these utilities that you're getting the access to with the Accordion Rolling Forecast. So with that concludes the live demo portion. I want to hand it back over to Pete to just talk a little bit about what it looks like to implement something like Accordion.
Thank you, Gary. And thanks so far to everyone who's posted a question in the chat. Feel free, as I'm sure the wheels are turning, to continue to post your questions in the Q&A and we'll answer them. So really, the slide is titled implementation, but the way I think about it is why the Accordion? What's in it for me as a customer? How does it differ from just a traditional implementation of a forecasting solution in OneStream? And as I mentioned earlier, Black Diamond Advisory, we really jumped at the chance that OneStream gave us to develop on the OneStream platform. So we've taken, decades of collective experience across multiple EPM tools, and we put together what we saw as leading practices or things that we saw that our customers needed in their FP&A cycles time and time again. And we really sat down and looked at it and said, well, why do we as an ecosystem of implementation partners continue to reinvent the wheel over and over again that is costing our customers money and time? So first and foremost, everything that Gary just demonstrated for you comes ready to use out of the box. You have to define your drop downs, as he mentioned, whether it's entity department, department product, so on and so forth. You have to define your row sets. And really from there, you could begin to use it, right? Short of wanting to maybe perhaps put your own specific drivers in those drop downs. So this is an accelerated time to value first and foremost. It's really starting us at where the true starting line should be, not doing the things we do over and over again. The other reason that we feel tremendously about the value in Accordion is it's leveraging built-in best and leading practices, because it not only is taken into account the experience and expertise of all the folks at Black Diamond Advisory, but as we implement this across our customer base, and all of our customers are leveraging Accordion in one form or another. Sometimes it doesn't look exactly like what you saw today. I know we have a handful of our customers on the phone today. Sometimes it looks a little bit different, but the underlying engine and the core technology behind it is certainly in use. And as we've learned over the years from our prior customers, we continue to learn from our current customers. And so when we identify an improvement, we are able to kind of crowdsource, if you will, those best or leading practices. Perhaps, for example, a new driver comes online and we say, well, geez, well, why didn't we think of that? Everyone would benefit from having that, right? And then we can roll it out to our customer base. Secondly, or third, in the third bullet point, we have scalability, right? Gary showed you just an operating expense form, and he started to get into what'll likely be our next webinar, the compensation planning solution. So even, as you dig into some of your, OpEx, COGS, or revenue line items, GL accounts or groupings of accounts, if perhaps they don't fit a simple historical data trend model, we have the ability to build out detailed by person compensation. We have the ability to build out detailed revenue modeling and gross profit, gross margin models, and then tie them back in. And in that case, kind of the Accordion serves as this central network, this hub and spoke model where you can bring additional modeling functionality in, whether that's on day one or down the road. So you're always able to do that. And last but certainly not least, along that lines of scalability, just the ease of maintenance of a solution like this. So for example, we know right now that there's a very new upgrade, version 8 from OneStream. And we know for the first time in the history of OneStream that this one is a proceed with caution. It's out on their website. Before you install this, please contact us. And the reason for that is it's actually quite exciting. They have made tremendous improvements and updates to the underlying technology to really allow OneStream as a platform and solution to accelerate into the future. We're starting to see things like applied AI. And so, but what that means is when you're doing an upgrade, as we upgrade our customers and we get a preview update, we test. What does this look like when we upgrade Accordion? What does this look like when we upgrade our compensation planning solution? So our preview of those versions, coupled with our solutions and technology, allow us to prepare for and proactively address any updates that need to be made to allow for the platform upgrade itself. So there's value in this tool during your implementation. As we said, you accelerate that time to value. You're using a lot of pre-built features and functions that will live on, but it also continues to live on throughout the lifetime of your investment in the OneStream platform. Okay. And just a final poll question to close things out. Curious, now that you've seen it, if you believe that adopting a model that we showed you today would enhance your organization's ability for your forward thinking and hopefully improve your decision making, right? Get you out of the data entry business and get you into the data analysis business. Perfect. Okay, so most folks, and this is really quite validating for us. We believe quite strongly in this solution, and so it's really helpful to see that the folks here in the webinar also agree. I want to thank you all for joining us today. The Q&A is still open if there are any last minute questions. We're going to have our contact info up on the screen here in just a minute. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank our presenter, Gary Soreo. We'd like to invite you, if you're going to be out at Splash, both Gary and I will be there. We'd love to have you come by our booth. We will have the Accordion Rolling Forecast demo up and running, along with our other solutions like compensation planning, capital planning, strategic finance, some tax provision and reporting solutions, as well as a look at some visual analytics that we've been working on as well. So I'd really enjoy seeing you all at Splash if you're going to make it out to Vegas next month. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to contact us. That is a working QR code. If you scan it, you'll get Gary's contact information directly, or you can always contact us through our website, LinkedIn, and other methods. All right, once again, everyone, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and the remainder of your week.
Thank you, everyone.